Welcome to TypeScript FM, the friendly podcast for TypeScript developers where we bring you news, updates, and interviews from the community with plenty of tomfoolery sprinkled in. I'm your host, Kamran Ayub, and I'm joined by my co-host and best bud, Eric Onerheim. Together, we're the two TypeScript fools. Welcome to the show. Welcome to the show. Hello, hello.
Hello, hello, hello.
I'm going to start first, Eric. Is that okay?
That is okay. You have some big news.
I usually say, how you doing, Eric? But I just looked at my stats for my latest course, which was the AI agents course that I did. It was an update to a previous course, but what they did is they put this into like a new offering that's like separate. So my old course, which is named the same, is still in the catalog, and people are still watching it. So confusingly, there's also the brand new course, which is part of their AI Academy offering or whatever they have. And guess what, Eric? I'm a top 25 course author on Pluralsight.
That's bonkers.
That's
so cool.
This is huge news. I mean,
it is huge news. You're like in a new tax bracket.
I've been in the top 100. I've been in the top 1,000. I've never been in the top 20, let alone 25. So I'm 21, so I want to say that I'm in the top 20, but technically in the top 25.
Your course can order a scotch.
Yeah, exactly.
In a good way.
In a good way. So things are looking good because payments scale to the course rank as well as whatever percentage I chose for it. So I'm really, really happy with that. I mean, it's like a humble brag, sort of, but I'm also like really proud of this because I think I'm 15 plus courses in now, and I've been doing this since 2015. And before 2022, it was always off and on. Like I might have done one course a year, maybe two a year, right?
Well, this has been your full-time gig now for
It's been
almost
full-time 2 years. So 2 years full-time, a little bit 3.5 years where I was doing a little bit more than I used to because I was doing it part-time. So yeah, I worked the system. I created my pipeline. I planned the courses that I wanted to do. I tackled them, one after the other, one after the other, one after the other. And it's paid off, and I'm very, very happy and excited about it.
Yeah, it's huge, man. Like, you've been working very hard.
Yeah, I think now I can finally officially apply the label to myself that I'm unemployable now.
You're never going back.
We're not going back to work, buddy. No 40 hours a week for me. So yeah, I'm really happy. Actually, this will be, I think, the very first summer where I can do absolutely no work. Paid work, I should say, because I love doing the podcast and I'm obviously going to still keep doing that. And I like working on my product, and that's work. And I like contributing to Excalibur, and that's work. But that doesn't count to me. It doesn't feel like work. You know what I mean?
Yeah. What is it, the old adage, if you do what you love, you never work a day in your life?
That's right. Yep. That's what this feels like, I'll tell you.
If Excalibur paid my bills, guess what I would be doing 100% of the time?
Yeah, we gotta get you there. Let me get there first. I'll pave the way, I'll figure it out, and then let's go together and we'll get you full time.
We'll ride off into the sunset.
That's right. So what have you been up to?
Well, it hasn't been as exciting, but I've been cleaning up kitty poop.
That's somewhat exciting because then at the end of it, there's no more kitty poop.
Yeah, she's been a little sick again. Not sure what she's getting into, but it happens about twice a year.
Really?
She gets sick, and the vet's not sure what it is. She seems fine. She's maintaining weight, but let's just say it's the basement is in a heinous state. We'll just leave it at that.
Oh, boy.
But on top of that, in some exciting news, Kamran and I submitted our talks to NDC Oslo.
We did. Yeah. We got together in person because you had a vacation last week. So that was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. I slept and ate burritos.
The plan was to co-work, and I really don't know how much we actually co-worked. We were mostly just talking.
Yeah. It was like air quotes co-working.
That's right.
But we just hung out for like 6 hours and ate some spicy chicken.
That's right. But so we are hoping to do a live show That's what we submitted. And by us putting this out into the public, onto the podcast, hopefully that energy will reach the organizers at NDC and be like, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. Because both of us are not strangers to conference talks. Like before I quit and before I had kids, I was doing conference talks several times a year. That's certainly gone down now since I've had kids. I mostly stay local, but now that they're getting older, I would love to get back on the horse, as it were, and do more talks. So this is our foray into that. And you talked last 2 years in a row, I think, at NDC.
I've been at NDC the last 2 years. I did one about JavaScript performance. And this is like how to squeeze maximum cycles out of your JavaScript. And then I had a spicier one the year previous where I talked about how serverless is not all it's cracked up to be. I had a spicy title that was You Don't Want Serverless.
Cool. Should we move on to the news for the week of April 13th?
We should. And at the top of the news, there's an interesting anecdote from the TypeScript team. Daniel Rosenwasser reports that an internal team adopted TSGo, which is, for those in the know, that's going to be TypeScript 7. They told us they were able to shave 400 hours a month off CI builds.
Wow.
That's a lot of time.
I should charge for that.
Do you get a kickback? Do you get a bonus?
That's really cool.
That is a non-trivial amount of time waiting for builds to run. And I feel that in my bones, and I can't wait for my own CI builds at work to run much faster.
That's right. Cool. Very exciting. We do have a Node.js release that just recently came out. This is Node 24.15. There is sort of a laundry list of notable changes. I think one of the notable changes that's worth talking about, though, is that require ESM has been marked stable.
What?
And actually, so has the module compile cache, which I know that we've sort of discussed, not really in detail, but we linked to a talk by Joey Chung, who implemented that and also implemented require ESM. And she has a talk on the compiler cache and module compilation, which I think dives pretty deep into why that's kind of a big deal.
Yeah. And for those not in the know, this is cross-module interop between require and ESM. So this is kind of like the missing link that really is going to propel this even faster towards ESM. Because the big problem for a long time was these two module systems were completely incompatible. So you had to jump all onto ESM, and then it was viral. And then ESM could only use ESM,
Yes. Yep. Yeah. So require ESM, stable, module compile cache, stable. So I think that's the big news for 24.15. There is other stuff. There's stuff with test runners. There's stuff with SQLite being marked as a release candidate. So not quite stable, but more than experimental. Now it's a release candidate.
Yeah, this is so cool. I love how folks are dropping in SQLite adapters as just part of the thing.
Yep. SQLite is boring but good.
Yeah, I've heard it said that it is the most deployed piece of software on the planet.
Yeah, that makes sense.
In the world of the web, the HTML and Canvas proposed API is kind of been taking the world by storm. And I ran across a really cool website that just is a really terse explainer so that you can be like, oh, this is what it means in code. And it's dope. The website is html-in-canvas.dev. And they have right at the top, there's 3 new primitives. You can add layout subtree attribute to your canvas element, and you can just drop HTML in there. Then if you do that, you can go ahead and draw elements into web GPU textures or WebGL textures. You can just use them as textures.
Use elements, HTML DOM elements as textures.
That's right. It's bizonkers. It's so cool.
It's kind of mind-blowing. But here's a use case that I think really puts it into good perspective, which is something that I would use it for, which is to create sharing images. Right? Or social preview images, like if you have a blog or something like that, because it's really hard to do that right now in a cross-browser compatible way. There are hacks with like HTML to canvas or using SVG with HTML embedded in it and then, exporting the image data from the SVG. But this will just make it way easier, cross-platform. But, we have to wait till all the browsers implement it. But that would be great. It would be sweet to do that.
As a game developer, I'm pretty excited because building UIs in Canvas is really hard. And sometimes it's what you want, right? Sometimes it's what's needed for the game. This allows you to do that super easily. You don't need to build your own layouting engine in Game Engine. You can just leverage the browsers.
Yeah, and
then you can paint it in 3D somewhere.
It'll be faster, I think.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Who knows?
But at least it'll be GPU powered, right?
Yeah. This will be so cool.
That's pretty sweet.
They have a whole bunch of really interesting demos, including a frosted glass backdrop. They have a whole list of demos with a ton of really neat stuff. So if you want to look at some of that, check it out. It does require right now either Chrome or Brave, and it's flag only, so it's not on by default. So if you want to look at these demos, you're going to have to turn on some browser flags. So keep that in mind. And then there's also a great video I'll link in the show notes that explains this really well as well.
Cool. Yeah, you should definitely go check it out. Next up from Cloudflare, their blog, they just wrapped up their Agents Week, which is like an innovation week hackathon type deal. And they had a bunch of different announcements as part of Agents Week. And there's like too much to go through. In fact, it's like a long blog post. We have actually talked a little bit about some of them. Like the agent sandboxes generally available, that was released. There is identity-aware and secure egress controls for sandboxes. We haven't really talked about durable objects in workers, which is, I actually feature that in my upcoming course, the Advanced MCP, because I build a Cloudflare worker with durable agents as an MCP server. And it's really slick. Like, I really like the ergonomics of it. But basically, a durable object is like a stateful server, but it's still serverless, which is kind of mind-boggling. It's not like a separate storage engine, but it's like if you took a class object and you made it persist so that you could retrieve it and call it. And the other cool thing about durable objects is that you can do in-process invocations on it. So a worker could call a durable object or invoke a request, and it won't do any network hops. It'll just be routed transparently behind the scenes to the durable object. So it's really fast. So they're pretty cool.
Yeah, that is one of the big upsides of this durable object API, because traditionally interacting with traditional databases, because databases expect you to have like long-lived connections. So there's a lot of, old world database stuff that is pretty incompatible with serverless stuff without some adapting and, without some hackery. Like you need to use like PG bouncer as like a connection pooler if you're like doing, and load balancer if you're doing Postgres.
Mm-hmm.
You need to do like cloud storage, like specific vendors, specific cloud storage for serverless things. That comes with some downsides. You got to use like Dynamo, or you got to use, this or that, this cloud thing. But this looks really cool.
Yeah, so they have just a bunch of other stuff. They have security announcements. They've got managed OAuth for agents to do like automated revocation, OAuth and scoped permissions for non-human identities. So like being able to give agents short-lived scoped OAuth tokens like automatically without a whole lot of boilerplate. They have secure private networking using Cloudflare Mesh. They've got a whole bunch of stuff designed around memory for agents. So they announced agent memory. They've got Project Think, which is a preview of the next edition of the Agents SDK. I'm not using that in my course. I'm using the current version, but that's what the next version is going to be. Yeah, they just have a whole bunch of other stuff. So we'll link to the blog post and you can read all about it. Next up, Mozilla has kind of a spicy take on Microsoft. Their shots fired at Microsoft about how Microsoft is rolling back some of its Copilot stuff that they sort of forced upon us in Windows. And I really like the blog post because it's talking about how Microsoft is saying that it wants to be quote unquote intentional about Copilot, but that they're really admitting that they made repeated choices to serve their business over their customers. So, I mean, they're rolling back stuff because of the backlash, right? Because people don't, it was just sort of pushed on them. They had no way to opt out of it. They was never an opt-in. I never told Windows to put Copilot in my taskbar. It just showed up, right? So anyway, the blog post sort of goes into how Mozilla is thinking about AI differently and how they're introducing it in Firefox and things like that. So anyway, I thought it was kind of a funny sort of poke at Microsoft. Alrighty. And then finally, we also talked, this is sort of related, and that we had talked after talking about Mythos Preview last time, which is, I mean, what's going to happen, 1 to 2 years from now when, let's say that we have, if this is true, we have models at our fingertips that maybe could be creating and finding vulnerabilities in open source software. What is going to happen to open source? And so there are different ways it could go, but I think cal.com shows that there might be a possibility that some open source projects might turn closed source, and that's what cal.com is doing. So they have a blog post, cal.com goes closed source, why AI security is forcing our decision. And they go into this thing that we were talking about in the last episode, which is AI security scanning can, even now, today, it's not a big if true, it is true that you can use a model to find security vulnerabilities pretty easily. In open source software. And even if it can't attack them autonomously, it can at least find the vulnerabilities. And that's just accelerating attackers, right? So if they don't have access to the source code, it's not impossible to hack, but it slows them down. And that's kind of the argument that they're making, that yes, it's not a panacea, right, going closed source, but we want to at least decelerate the amount of vulnerabilities and reducing the visibility into that source code, So I don't know if we're going to see this more and more. I would say probably for some of the large projects, we might start seeing this. Some of the smaller projects, not sure, like probably not for non-critical infrastructure and stuff, but it's interesting, like all these businesses that have like an open source core, like what are they going to do, Because if their commercial product is built on top of the open source core, well, suddenly attackers now have full visibility into ways to attack the commercial app, right? So Cal has a few separate blog posts on like the technical aspects of this, where their commercial code base has been forked and does differ in the way that the open source implementation is, but they still will be releasing cal.com as a self-hosted option with open source MIT license. It's just that you're taking on that risk yourself. And then for the commercial cal.com is for like teams. So it has the enterprise features, the teams features, things that you would attach commercial value to, right?
Yeah. And then whenever you're doing like cross-person communication, the stakes are a lot higher.
Yes.
So it makes sense that the individual use.
Right. Yep. Cool. We have some library watches.
Yeah. Remember, we had an episode about Elide.dev, and Elide is really cool because it allows you to do high-performance, multi-language software programming on the Graal VM runtime. So they support Java, Kotlin, Python, and TypeScript, if I remember right. Or if I think Python might have been in the pipeline. No, it says that on their website. But they support all of these in process.
And interleaved.
Wild stuff. Like you can import Python from your TypeScript. Like,
that's what's mind-blowing, is that in the same file, we're talking about in the same file, you can import a Python module and a TypeScript file, and they work.
Yeah. Well, they stealthily added 1.0 beta releases in their nightly.
Yes. Yeah, and they updated the website too. So they have some new docs and a new website, and they definitely didn't tell us to announce this, so, we're just making it visible. Yeah. It was a stealth release.
We noticed.
Sorry, guys.
Go check it out. It's really cool tech. Very exciting, and we have an episode on it with Sam, so definitely check that out.
Yeah, go listen to that.
Next up is Phaser 4 dropped. So this is a main competitor to Excalibur, I'd say. Probably the most popular JavaScript, TypeScript game engine out there. And they dropped a whole new renderer and new GPU sprite rendering method and a whole bunch of stuff. They also have an editor. They have a whole bunch of things. But definitely check them out if you are interested in making games for the web. I personally would like it if you checked out Excalibur 2, but whatever floats your boat, man. Yeah, check out the new Phaser 4. It's been a long time coming, and they're making some big, bold claims about performance.
Nice. That's cool. Remember that we have mentioned numpy-ts a few times now, and we've been watching the library, and I just saw on the TypeScript subreddit, this was the #1 hot post of last week. NumPy-TS is now as fast as native NumPy, and in some cases, slightly faster.
That's wild.
Yeah.
How did they do that?
This is really cool. So they actually do talk about how they did it. So if you want to read more about that, I'm not sure how they did it, but I think they did some WASM magic. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah, this is unbelievable. Like, this makes me feel so good about one of the talks that I submitted about WebAssembly. So hopefully I get to give it.
Yeah, that would be fun.
Speaking of game engines, MavonEngine just hit. It's a Three.js game engine for single and multiplayer games. And taking a look at their code, it looks like it's a purpose-built for like multiplayer 3D games. So Three.js is a mostly 3D graphics library. So if you're familiar with doing NAD component systems, it looks like they support that right out of the box. You can just set up a server super fast and get going. Their little code snippet is incredibly compelling and terse to me as a game developer. And they also have a very early work in progress level editor. So if that's something that you need, check that out. Nice. I'm excited.
One thing I thought you would like is that I think they're the only engine that has server authoritative physics. So they have a physics engine running on the server.
This is actually super huge because I would argue that Roblox, their secret sauce has been the ability to have server authoritative physics engine. They have some of the state of the art physics simulations that no one else is doing. Like, I think that's Roblox's secret sauce is their networking code. Whatever cool. they're doing something wild because, like, eschew everything else. That is pretty impressive technology.
And then they just build a marketing machine on top of it.
That's right. And attach a whole bunch of other maybe somewhat problematic things to that.
That's right.
The physics, very cool.
That's cool. Nice.
This next one was very interesting. This is GraphQL.tada, and this was from Blue Sky user Jovi Crook. I'm so sorry if I got your name wrong. But they built a GraphQL query engine for TypeScript.
Yeah, the thing with GraphQL is that you can write queries like inline in code, but they're definitely not type checked. Otherwise, what you can do is you can create .graphql files, and those are typed with like GraphQL, but they don't necessarily generate or do anything with TypeScript types. So usually you have to either generate the TypeScript typings from the GraphQL server code and then have that as like a build step or something like that. This eschews all of that. It is all on the fly in TypeScript, and you can write your native GraphQL queries in pure TypeScript. They automatically infer their types, and editors provide immediate feedback, auto-completion, diagnostics, and GraphQL type hints. So this is actually super cool, especially if you're a GraphQL developer.
This reminds me, you know what this reminds me of? This reminds me of ArcRegex, because you use this GraphQL, you import GraphQL from GraphQL.tada, and you say GraphQL, open paren, backtick. You can now drop into GraphQL syntax, which is very close to TypeScript. And then on the left-hand side, a fully typed query object falls out of the left side.
Yeah, and do you know how they did it? They used the little-known feature that we have talked about on the show before, a TypeScript plugin.
This is so cool, and I love that they have the Shiki, like, I don't know if they're actually using Shiki on their website, but they have the Shiki like documentation where you can just see what the TypeScript compiler would output and infer. So you can just hover over it and like live the life you would have if you use this. It's so cool.
It is neat. This is one of the other things that I'm like, what happens to something like this once we have TypeScript Go? Out of the box, this is not going to work with TSGo because this is a TypeScript language service plugin. So I don't know if it's going to work with TSGo. And I think there might be nuance between the language server and plugins for the language server versus like the compiler API, which is different. So it's possible that this might actually still work with TSGo. I don't know. So don't quote me on that. But it does bring up a good point of like these tools are cool. So I really hope that there's like a nice kind of dev story for like being able to use this with TypeScript Go, TypeScript 7, I should say now.
Yeah, this is super slick. I might be using this. I might be using this tomorrow.
We built, GraphQL is probably not used a ton, but we used it on a project at Target, and I was really happy with it.
Yeah, I use it a ton as well. We use a thing called Hasura, which is kind of a convention-based GraphQL like aggregator for different data sources that you might have. But it's pretty slick. I'm a fan.
Nice. All right, we have some community highlights. One of the first things from Evan Yu is the State of Vue 2026. So if you want to know what's new in Vue, well, just go watch this. This was a talk that Evan gave at Vue.js Amsterdam very recently. And Evan is always a cool presenter and speaker to listen to. And I'm sure there's some cool stuff in here. I have not watched it, but I did want to highlight it for the community. Next up, another talk. This one is from the State of the Browser conference. And Mike Hall gave a talk, Lessons from Building for the Bottom of the Web. I can read the abstract quick. It's really short. Most of us build for the web we see every day. Zippy networks, evergreen browsers, and devices that feel dated after 2 years. But there's another web living alongside it, a web with wobbly connections, aging devices, and browsers that treat your CSS as mere suggestion. This talk is about what happens when you have to make the web work under conditions you'd never endure, the unexpected techniques that emerge, and why building for the bottom of the web was the most rewarding experience of my career. That's pretty cool.
That is pretty cool.
Yeah, so go check that out. I'm going to watch it. I put it on my watch list, so I'm definitely going to watch it.
Yeah, that's definitely on my watch list for tomorrow.
Cool. And I now am watching what's going on in TanStack, and they did have some cool blog posts recently. So first of all, TanStack Start is supporting React Server components, but they're doing it differently. So they're not doing the Next.js approach. If you can think of Next.js as server first and TanStack Start as client first.
Mm-hmm. I think what I really like about TanStack Start in this, it requires explicit remote procedure calls to be created with their create server FN function. So the client server boundary is extremely clear. So you can't be confused accidentally.
Yes.
You're very sure what's about to run on the server and what isn't.
That's right. I think one of the most interesting things is that they created a new pattern called a composite component. And so what that does is it can render server UI, but it can expose slots for client content. And slots are using plain React patterns you already know. So you can use children or render props. And because the client owns the component tree, the components you pass into slots are just regular client components. There is no use client directive required. The server positions them as opaque placeholders, but can't inspect, clone, or transform them. And that's the point. The server can ask for something goes here without needing to know what that something is. So this is pretty interesting. The API, you sort of like call a function called create composite component. So it's similar to the way that you create server functions in TanStack Start. So they make it more explicit rather than implicit. So it's not like a special syntax or anything. You're actually calling a function and then you're passing JSX into it, and then it handles that behind the scenes for you. So when you look at the code, you can see I don't really know what a composite component is, but that's what it's creating, and so I can sort of see what it's doing. Next, they also had another blog post, and this one I won't go too deep into, but they have that TanStack AI offering, which is like a model router, basically, and they go into how they test it across 7 different providers. And it's not like they're calling an LLM when they do these tests. They're basically testing that their abstraction works against all the model APIs. And so they use mocking to do that, but they have set it up in such a way where they can parallelize most of it so they don't like step over each other. And they're using a library that lets you mock LLM responses in a structured way. So they can just test that their API works without like going to the actual models to do like end-to-end testing. And all their tests complete in like 2 minutes for every PR. So that's pretty sweet.
Yeah. And if you're interested in doing something similar, they're using a library called aimock, and it's github.com/copilotkit/aimock. So that works with any AI SDK, not just the TanStack one.
Yes.
So that's pretty slick. And in fact, I think we might have to look at this because we have some internal code that's doing interactions with models. So this could be super useful for speeding up or just even testing interactions in general.
Right. Yes. Yep. Very cool stuff. We have another blog post by Cal Peterson, and this is related to a topic that we've talked a few times about, dependency cooldowns. And Cal's take is that dependency cooldowns turn us collectively into free riders. Mm-hmm. And his argument is that we basically are banking on a poor soul to download an NPM package and get got, and then for them to report it, and then the rest of us can benefit from waiting. And I think he makes a good point. And I agree that I don't think it's like a long-term solution, because what we really want to see is we really want to see these registries fix the root cause of the issue. And so one of his proposals, he does come with a proposal, which is that they should probably be implementing upload queues, because we do that elsewhere in other registries in the programming world. I think PyPy was one of the ones he brought up. So yeah, why doesn't NPM do that? I mean, do they have plans to do that? We don't know. They haven't said that. So I think in this next year, I really hope that we hear something from Microsoft on what their plan is to address this. Now, one of the comments after I posted about this that I also think is true is we kind of have to use what we have, right? And dependency cooldowns are a tool that we do have to lower the risk, but obviously it doesn't eliminate the risk. And he makes an argument that you can easily bypass it by manually like installing a package, and then you can still get got. So it's not even a great solution like for individual developers either, but I think it can be useful for CI and CD and Dependabot and Renovate and things like that to slow them down.
Yeah, Cal has a really good quote in here, which is individually rational, collectively bonkers.
Yes.
Which is, if we all did this, it would basically remove the effectiveness of the cooldown, right?
Exactly. Yep. It's sort of like what's the state at the end of it? Well, everybody has a cooldown, and so nobody has a cooldown then.
Exactly. Next one is a humorous story told in Blue Sky from Ryan Cavanaugh of the TypeScript team, how he accidentally denial of service to NPM with TypeScript when he was developing the automatic type acquisition feature in TypeScript for packages, like the definitely type packages. So it's a fun read. I'd definitely check it out.
Did he accidentally turn like every client to a bot?
I think that's the thrust. Everyone using TypeScript suddenly was getting types out of NPM.
Yeah. Are we sure that he didn't inject a Bitcoin miner for a while in there?
Missed out.
Yeah.
We could have office spaced this.
That's right. I did have a Bleet of the Week. This is from Jesse Segal. And they said, the TypeScript compiler just started giving me life advice. You can't cast your dreams to reality, it said. Guess I'll keep debugging both. I mean, that would be a more helpful error than most errors I feel like we get.
Really would be, wouldn't it? I have a secret of the handbook this week. There was a keyword that I ran across that I hadn't used before, and I wanted to bring it up. There is an accessor keyword in TypeScript. So this actually came out in TypeScript 4.9, and there is a TC39 proposal for it, which is stage 3, but I don't think it's Dunsky's yet. I think it's kind of, we're kind of in a holding pattern with it. But in any case, what this does is you can say accessor property, and you'll get auto method generation, auto getter and setter generation like you do in like C#. So you can do accessor, name, string, : string, and you'll get a get and set. Why is this useful? Well, right now, decorators only work on methods. So if you wanted to do like a property decorator, you really can't do it right now. And I ran across this because I was playing with lit HTML, and to do their change detection, they need to have the reactive property change detection. If you want to use their decorator for that, you got to use the accessor keyword. And it makes sense because under the hood, what falls out of the compiled TypeScript is it desugars to like a real private field, a real private backing field, like it does in C#, and a getter and setter of the same name that you did originally. And then in lit, you can decorate those methods.
That's awesome.
It's pretty neat. I had no idea this existed. I'll link to the TC39 proposal. Hopefully this can get across the finish line this year. So I hope it doesn't I hope it doesn't stall out, because it's still stage 3.
Yeah.
I'll include the docs here in the show notes. I don't know. It was a feature that I enjoyed, and even if it doesn't make it into JavaScript, it desugars to something that is pretty idiomatic in my opinion.
That's cool. Sweet. Do you have some cool links?
I do have one cool link.
What you been watching lately?
I have been fascinated with car YouTube. And I think I've talked about this a little bit, but it's my new special interest because it's a technical topic that I know nothing about. I have like a very surface level understanding of how cars work. But like I'm watching a bunch of people work on cars on YouTube. Big Time is another YouTube channel that I watch, but I've been watching this YouTube channel called Garbage Time where they do horrible, horrible things to cars. There's one where they replace the oil of the car with eggnog. And so if that seems like it's fun to watch, it is.
That's awesome.
And you too can see what happens when you replace the oil with eggnog.
Well, I want to know if I can buy my oil at Aldi now.
Yeah, very entertaining. Can recommend. They're British and hilarious. Here's another one where they replace the engine oil with chocolate.
Nice.
I bet you can guess how well that goes.
So I've got a cool watch on the same vein, which is that my son and actually my daughter now, they have been watching YouTube that has been focused on like destruction tests and things like that. And there's a channel from these guys in Australia called How Ridiculous. And I've watched a few of these, and they are pretty entertaining. Like they do some crazy stuff, such as dropping a 1-ton hammer on multiple things and seeing what happens, or a giant 1-ton axe that cuts a Tesla in half, and all sorts of other pretty ridiculous stuff. So it's actually really entertaining. And the kids are learning stuff, which I think is always fun. So they've been starting to get into more of the kind of STEM edutainment kind of YouTube, which is kind of cool. And the other cool game I have is one I started playing last night. I don't know if I'll be able to finish it soon because I got to get this course out the door. But this did eat up my time last night. This is Indika. The best way I can describe it is, well, it's a game where you play as a Russian nun. Okay, but it switches back and forth between like 3D and then like pixel graphics for her memories, like stuff that she remembers as a kid. And those sequences are done in pixel graphics, and there's like mini games and things like that. But it's also like a puzzle adventure game, so it's single player. It's narrative driven. It is mature, has a mature theme. They do talk about some stuff. There's some content warnings in there, but it's really enjoyable, and this is right up my alley. I love these types of like single-player narrative games. So, as an example, one of the levels I was going through, like it takes place in Russia, obviously, and it was like a fish factory, and you like have to like navigate between these giant fish hooks that are spinning in a big tube, and you gotta like walk in between them and make sure you don't get shoved off and die. And so, yeah, it's pretty entertaining and very clever, I think, with a lot of the puzzles and things like that.
Yeah, a couple of the tags on this are surreal, puzzle horror,
yep,
third person, dark.
Yes.
So if you're wondering what it's about,
it's like dark humor for sure, because she has there's like a voice in her head, which is, I believe, supposed to be the devil. So there's that type of themes. So if you're not into that, you probably won't like it. But it actually reminds me of a game called Pentiment, which I also told you about. That's one of my favorite games I've ever played. It has a fantastic art style, but also the writing is absolutely fantastic. That one just kept me going. I could not put that one down. So Pentiment is also a good recommendation I would have. Cool. Well, it's time for the Minnesota long goodbye.
Yeah. Well, the thing that I'm thinking about a lot, other than the tired security thing, is the web has got a lot of really cool features now for video game development.
Yeah.
And I think I want to see more video games made with web tech. I will posit, this is my hot take, that HTML and CSS are the best ways to build UI. Because I've seen some of these other UI frameworks that game developers use to build UIs, and woof.
Woof is probably the best way to describe it, yeah.
Now,
or the programmatic building of UI, like what we used to do in C# Windows forms or Visual Basic, things like that.
Yeah. Now, I will say that Unity has a JavaScript UI framework, and you can do React style stuff.
Yeah.
And I think that if you're doing that, your life is way better.
Right.
Because it's like TypeScript. I think it's called Unity 1 UI or something. It's something very ungoogleable, but it's a JavaScript, TypeScript, React-ish way of doing UX in Unity. So can recommend that. I've got a few friends building games and using that, and then they're having fun with that.
I was proposing to you, and you would know more about the implications of this than I would, but I would love to see first-class UI framework with Excalibur that is it's basically HTML and Canvas where it is supported, and then some kind of fallback where HTML is a layer on top of the canvas for when it's not supported. I think there's probably a lot of nuance in how that might work, and maybe they won't interoperate with each other. But basically, HTML and Canvas, perfect for in-game UI.
I think it's actually extremely doable with the HTML in Canvas. The layout subtree allows you to have HTML inside that Canvas element. The thing I neglected to mention is that when you do that, it still lays out all of the elements, but it's just invisible. But you can composite it because they're assuming you want to do something with it in the canvas. You can composite it. Now, if that didn't work, it would just it would be a fallback. For example, if the canvas wasn't supported in your browser, this is the markup it would render, right? Because that's how the web works. Is if it doesn't know what an element is, it treats it as like a div.
Right.
It just treats it as, I don't know what this element is. I'm just going to treat it like a piece of structure. And that's how you did fallbacks in the past. What you could maybe do is, okay, well, I'm going to do that and also do I'll fall back and do a layered overlay, like a z-index pane over the canvas, which is what I do right now. So for UI in games, for Excalibur in particular, I use lit elements and I position them over the canvas. And then I have some magic to resize and scale things to match the pixel density of the canvas. So, whatever resolution you're doing, the CSS pixels will match the game. So you can resize the screen, and then the HTML will resize like it should. And you would, if you didn't know any better, it would appear to be in Canvas.
There you go.
The advantage, though, is that you get all of the browser accessibility things. You get all the focus things.
Yep.
All of that stuff, that screen readers, all of that high contrast stuff, you get pretty much for free if you're doing semantic HTML. So that's one big boon. And you just get keyboard navigation built in. So you don't have to do anything extra if you have real HTML buttons.
Yeah. I mean, you're just leveraging what the browser can just natively do better than any library, better than any framework,
That's right. So can recommend. I generally tell people, if you're building games for the web, use HTML as your UI. We don't really need a purpose-built UX framework, other than I think there is something to be said for, hey, I don't want to build this thing that positions the HTML in the right spot, bespoke every time. So that is something on my radar. I do want to do that. But everything else, BYO framework.
Yeah, I think Excalibur can make that shell, right? It can create the UI shell and then just put whatever you want into it. And then once the HTML and Canvas is supported, maybe just the shell renderer changes, right?
Yeah,
cool.
No, I think you could do, and you can do extra cool stuff, because I don't know if it was abundantly clear, but you can just take a snapshot of the DOM element and upload it as a picture. And you could do anything to that picture in WebGL. You can like write a shader that runs across it, and you can do anything to pixels.
Yeah, that's pretty
sweet.
So
you could do really bonkers stuff. Now, there's probably also like a security angle here to tie it back to security. They probably need to work out hopefully, like, there's no way to like steal people's screens with this, like scoop up. Like, I can imagine the clickjacking attacks to be epic if they don't do this right.
Yep.
So clearly there probably are some like spec hurdles to get over and security hurdles to get over before we get this, but it is exciting.
Yeah, because when I was doing a little bit of research for doing the social sharing images, like all I wanted to do was like, why can't I just take a screenshot of this DOM component? The browser is clearly rendering it.
Mm-hmm.
Why can't I take a screenshot? And the answer is because that's a security hole.
Yes,
because you can take a picture of a password screen, if you were able to do that. So that's why it's not natively implemented in the browser. There are workarounds, and one of those workarounds is to render stuff to a canvas and then snapshot it. That has its own issues of like trying to match DOM rendering and stuff. But then there's another native way to do it, which is to use HTML inside an SVG. And that's through, I think, SVG foreign object, I believe, is part of the spec.
Yep.
But not all browsers support that. Specifically, iOS does not support that. Yeah, so iOS users in my app do not have a way to do the sharing images, except that they can just manually take a screenshot, which is something you can do easily on a mobile device. So it's not like a terrible deal. It's not an ideal UX though, right? And so I was excited about HTML and Canvas because, if it actually gets proposed and actually passes into the spec and becomes a thing, maybe Safari and iOS will implement it, and then I'll just have a nice experience that just works for all my users, which would be great.
Maybe we can have nice things.
Yeah. I mean, and then the real way to do it right now that you can guarantee will work for everybody is to do it all on the server, right? So you can use a server rendering library to do that. But again, the ergonomics of that as compared to like just taking my DOM and shoving it into a canvas or SVG, like much easier.
Yeah, we have a social feature at work that does that server side. Spoiler, there's like some Node canvas stuff going on that generates an image that you can download.
Yep. And if I did that, I mean, I feel like that would be a use case for a serverless function because I don't really want to put that. Now, I don't want to put that load in my regular web server, and I don't want to put that code in my regular web server code. And because it's a dedicated tool and endpoint that just does the one thing, I want it to do it well, and I'll use whatever tool, gets me that job done really well. And then I can cache it, at the CDN and stuff like that too.
Yeah. Yeah. Depending on how big you make your images, and if you make them like JPEGs, they're teeny tiny. Yeah. Like a JPEG served off a CDN blip.
Yep. It's exciting. The web, as you like to say, always bet on the web, right?
Always bet on the web. I stole that from Brendan Eich, but yes, always bet on the web.
Yep.
I think it's pretty clear that the web has won, and everyone's just catching up.
That's right. If we stay here long enough, we'll be able to get to do all the cool things the native kids get to do.
That's right.
All right. Sounds good. I'm going to go to sleep now.
Yeah, me too.
All right. Good night.
Good night.
Hi, everyone. This is Kamran. I just wanted to thank you for listening to the show, and we hope you enjoyed the episode. If you want to see the show notes, you can check your podcast player or go to typescript.fm where you'll see a list of all the episodes. If you enjoyed the show, tell your friends, and please rate it on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, because that's how the show grows and gets discovered by more people. If you want to suggest news or a project that should be covered, or just want to say hi, email us at feedback@typescript.fm. If you want to follow us on social, we're both active on Blue Sky. I'm at comronicus.com, and Eric is at ericonerheim.com. You can also follow the show directly at typescript.fm.